Double Primer is back-to-back conversations with someone passionate about their work and passionate about someone else's work. Mostly art and mostly Atlanta. I'm your host, Sean Mills. Welcome to Double Primer episode 29. Tonight is Wednesday, January the 16th. I'm your host, Sean, along with Tanju. Tonight's topics are going to be Nathan Pyle, a comic artist and illustrator, and I'll be talking about my own pizza box paintings. So, Tanju, could you tell me what's trending on your Twitter?
Okay, on top of my Twitter trending is a fake edition of the Washington Post claiming Trump something ... And honestly, I'm a little hesitant to even click on it. But there's a little picture of the Washington Post. Unprecedented is the headline. So there you go. Like I said, I'm a little afraid to click on it, but I ended up just clicking on it. Fake edition of the Post claiming Trump has resigned. Oh, if only this has been refuted by the publication.
Well, that's kind of a weird, timeless thing. Like the idea of a fake newspaper, that's almost seems antiquated.
Totally. That's a good, yeah, absolutely. I can't remember the last time I picked up a newspaper myself.
Right. And that's actually a good transition because before we jump into our first topic, I kind of want to touch on this. I think a common ground is that we're artists and makers, nerds and fans, and one of the things that comes with that is before I even knew any of those titles, I was kind of a fan of Thomas Edison as a kid.
Okay.
And so I think there are these kind of primordial makers that are even before that was even a movement, that there were these kind of icons.
Absolutely.
So I would put in that boat Edison and Albert Einstein and I was wondering who else, or Benjamin Franklin too. Do you have any other people you would throw in there?
Oh man, like quintessential. Yeah, I mean, I think everyone's got makers inside of them potentially, right? Or they're in denial. But yeah, going into mechanical engineering, there's a lot. I mean, James Watt and Newton, Isaac Newton as well as one that comes to mind. Faraday, Michael Faraday, a lot of just kind of at least in European history, right? The leading scientists of their days. Back then you had to make a lot of your own apparatus yourself, right? I think even Galileo and stuff was designing lenses and things like that for his telescopes. So, back in the day, we think of Leonardo da Vinci as being a Renaissance man, but I think they all were in a lot of capacities, where they were making their own equipment to support their observations and support their work, right? And you had to have a lot of variety of skills to be able to pull it off, not single-minded kind of. I think the era we're in today is much more specialized, right? I think back then they were much more generalists in a lot of ways.
Right. Actually,
I could go off on that for quite some time.
Right. Not to get too sidetracked, but
sure.
The thing that comes to mind for a lot of those things was my first introduction would be almost when you're first introduced to chapter books, and you can kind of start doing your own research for the first time in your life because you can read. I remember reading about all these guys, and one of the things that was the first thing they go to is their education. And so I remember reading about founding fathers and stuff, and saying they taught themselves Latin using primers or whatever. And so as a kid, I was thinking oh, that's the way to be a genius, is I have to teach myself Latin. And I had tried to check out a book from the library and teach myself Latin like all those guys.
Awesome. Did you just call it primers? Like they had primers?
Yeah.
Is that also where the double primer thing comes from a little bit?
Yep, yeah, for sure.
So cool.
Did you have anything like that where you're oh, I like Tesla, so I'm going to try to do this like Tesla, or?
Tesla, not. I am super inspired by Tesla, and I will say, I do remember when I helped first start the makerspace, I sort of used Tesla's lab burned down at one point in time up in New Jersey, and he managed to live through that. So if God forbid our makerspace burns down, we'll figure that out when we get there, right? There's a lot of risk management we're really not sure about. So that specifically crossed my mind, which I don't think is I would not recommend taking that approach, but that's kind of recently.
Well, that's an awesome contrast because like instead of looking at them for like what to follow, you're looking at them as like examples of even if they mess up, that's part of it. So
Yeah,
that's
I'm
pretty cool.
currently in a big phase of my life right now of trying to I hate so buzz like cliche to say embrace failure, but of that mindset of like how do you build off of failures and be able to try things out even though you're afraid of failing is really even me joining this podcast actually. Um, which actually I guess we'll get to it when I talked about the webcomic Nathan Pyle. There's a little bit of fear of failure associated that I'll get to here in a minute, right
Okay.
along this line.
Well, yeah, let's get into it. So let me set you up. Like Nathan Pyle, he's got a book out about like his illustrations compiled about visiting New York. Was that your entry point, or how did you find Nathan Pyle?
No, yeah, no, I had no idea who he was. So I guess it's Nathan W. Pyle. I don't know if he's into the W for some reason, his middle initial. But I found him on Instagram, probably because I started following a couple web comics um, a year or two ago, and he showed up, and I really liked his work and just everything, the whole package in terms of the artwork as well as the message, and like he does a really great job like capturing emotion. And then I saw, I guess, there's a couple snippets of his book, The Etiquette of New York City. He actually has those on Instagram. It's a couple little one-offs, and those are really good. Um, and then most recently, he published a new book called 99 Ways to Draw or something like that, where it's like a prompt. It's like a doodle book that prompts you 99 different prompts and shows you his style. So um, that's kind of his latest project, which is pretty cool. But yeah, I'm a big fan of his. I guess he's probably one of my favorite web comics out there, and it's pretty cool. I think with Instagram, I found when I was younger, speaking of newspapers, we definitely had a newspaper in my house growing up, and for me, my favorite part was the comics, right? Especially the Sunday comics, and that was the part I missed the most of not having newspapers. And I feel like Instagram a couple years ago did a good job courting the web comics, especially when they started allowing them to do multiple pictures where you could swipe from up to 5 or 10 frames or whatever. Um, and the other thing I was talking to someone about this the other day. What I really like about the way Instagram's done it versus going to like Webtoons or like a dedicated web comic portal is that just in the same way it mimics the way I would consume newspapers, right? Where it's like you got 90% of like articles and classifieds and ads and whatever, which I would thumb through occasionally. And then you had the comic, which made it nice. And I feel like it's the same way with Instagram. It's like I get all kinds of junk and pictures of my friends and make whatever whole comic up. It kind of puts it up. And it's another way I like to consume comics is like in little bits and snippets. I don't want to sit there and read comics for an hour on end or whatever. Um, so that was pretty cool. So he was on there. And then what reminded me as we were planning this episode was, and talk about the fear of failure was when I agreed to do this, I was really excited. And then when we started trying to pick a date and I sent you that little laundry list of like, well, these are the, tiny little windows that I have available. It reminded me of this comic that he published, a while back. That's, it's like these two women and one woman walks up and she's got a smile on her face with her phone and her friend's on the other side. And she's like, her caption the bubble coming out of her mouth is literally like her calendar where she's available on like Sundays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays. And the other ones are crossed out. And then her friend is frowning. And then the friend responds with like the words are literally her calendar. And it's the exact opposite days that she's available, right? And now they're both frowning. I'm looking at it. And then at the bottom, it's like, oh, it was so nice knowing you. I'll never forget you, right? Like they're not, their schedules aren't compatible, I guess is the takeaway, which got me thinking like, yeah, I love to do this podcast. And then, oh, I only have these really weird, awkward windows throughout the week that we could regularly do this. Like fingers crossed, right? That you were going to be able to match those. You didn't come back with something that wasn't going to work.
Well, when I was looking at Nathan Pyle's work, it's kind of funny because it seems like he has both ends from what I've seen, where he has the kind of like almost Dilbert-esque like viewpoint of the adult modern, you
Yeah.
know, idea. But then he also has the other end of the spectrum where it's almost like these kind of kid level comics that like any age could get.
Yeah.
So he has like the two spectrums. I'll give you an example. One was like he kind of did this kind of like sardonic look of like life in the big city, having moved from like Ohio to New York City.
Mhm.
And then he also had like these comic strips where I think his most recent one on his Facebook, it's got like basically a dolphin version of Sherlock Holmes. Did you see that?
Yeah, I didn't quite understand. That's one I didn't quite
Yeah,
understand, but yeah, I did see that. I was like, I don't quite get this one, but
yeah.
okay.
It was so simple it went over your head, but basically it was because I think it was that like rudimentary where it had like a dolphin like
Oh,
version of Sherlock Holmes like
uh,
solving sea mysteries, and
yeah, I
so
didn't
like
understand the
yeah,
name. What is that? Dolph Lock? Is that
yeah,
Sherlock? Okay.
yeah, right. So like just to illustrate it for the listener, it's like the Sherlock Holmes dolphin is has a case where a fish says, "I have a stalker," and the dolphin realizes that the fish doesn't understand mirrors and that he is his own stalker. But it's like it's just so like accessible in terms of just being like there's zero like pretense to that. It's
Yeah.
just basically like the gag of, isn't that funny? Like, what if you mistake yourself for a stalker? You know?
And I think like the look, like he just, it's such a simple drawing, but he captures the emotion of like the little smirk and the eyes are closed, right? Like it's very warm, like emotionally, like this particular panel. But I think he does that really good with a lot of his work. It was just like super simple drawings, but just the little expressions that the way he draws them is just, he just nails it.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah. I was trying to find the right adjective for that because like positive or like almost like joyful. Like
yeah.
even in the stuff where it's supposed to be poking fun at like modern city life, it's like so a example of that was like a guy on the subway and there's an empty car and the caption is the empty car is empty for a reason. And then we're left to realize that's probably because like someone made a mess, whether biological or otherwise, right? But there's not. It's not really jeering at like the person who made the mess. It's just sort of like, isn't that kind of funny how that happens? Like it's almost like taking the sunny side version of it.
Yeah. Yeah. He's very positive for sure. I love that. And it's actually really weird because I'm looking at his profile right now and his like little tagline is I follow Jesus. And occasionally he has a little bit of a religious twist, but it's like so subtle and so positive and it's not preachy in any way. I love it.
Well, that's kind of funny you bring that up because maybe this is my own baggage, but I feel like we're living in such a like weird time culturally that when I see that, my first instinct isn't to be like, oh, he's a believer. My first question is like, oh, is this like, is he being kind of like tongue in cheek? You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
I don't think he is because I've been following him for a while and
Right,
I think he's genuinely, um, like positive spiritual guy kind of person,
right.
honestly.
But like, not to like judge him, but like for instance, like so an example of that is Jessica Alba, the actress. Her Twitter profile said "proud mom,"
Uh-huh.
and like obviously that there's like a little bit of a like that oh no matter how big a star I am, no matter how much money I have, I'm just a proud mom, and so like to like kind of tease that this other famous person, Joel McHale, he made his like bio say proud mom,
Mm,
and like so we're living this level this like age of irony where it's like
sure.
it's hard to know like what like whether it's authentic or not, and they live right next door to each other these days. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Not, yep. It all gets wrapped up as the fake. You just don't, I don't think it's something new, but it's just it's more accessible now, I think, and overwhelming. You just never quite know where people stand, what
For
you're
sure.
reading, how reputable it is, or any of that, right?
Right.
Uh,
And it's
absolutely.
also another opportunity for content because, especially with stuff like comic strips, where you can kind of play on like traditions or like expectations, and a
Yeah.
lot of times it's like it looks like it's for kids, but it's for adults. Like that's
Yeah.
the big one.
Absolutely. Yeah, so and I queued this up as like one of the things I find inspiration that inspires me, right? Is like his work and a lot of other web comics. I got a handful of like web comics that I really like. It's just the fact that they're putting the content out there. I've certainly had fantasies of having putting out a comic myself that I certainly don't have like the discipline to follow through on, a couple onesie twosies. And I think even him, when I first started following him, because I just saw the comic I reference actually has a BuzzFeed credit on it. So I think he worked for BuzzFeed for a while. And then about the time, a little bit after I started following him, he has a post where he announced that he like quit there and he's going independent. And I think that's when he started publishing his books. So he's like trying to make his way in the world kind of independently now, rather than collecting a salary for somebody else, right? Which I think is pretty inspiring.
Speaking of ironic, like BuzzFeed, do you have an opinion on that? Because like I feel like there's a half-life to things online these days where something will come out and it's like, oh, it's bananagrams dot 2000, and like you get one day where you're like, oh, this is kind of funny, and then like the banana duck thing of like, oh, we regret to inform you that banana duck is racist, like,
right.
and like BuzzFeed's an example of that it was like the internet was like a wild west, and then content aggregators came in, and it's like, oh, this is cool, but then it's like, some people feel it's exploitive of the actual content makers,
Right.
and maybe that's reflective of that he's like, I don't need them.
I don't know. Yeah, I feel like I'm either a little bit too old or like a little bit out of touch, where like I was never followed BuzzFeed or knew much about them, honestly, other than occasionally I hear people quote them or whatever, right? They sort of point back to it. But that was something I was like a little bit out of touch with in general. But there is like 3 or 4 web comics that I follow. Like they had their little crew. It seems like they all pass through BuzzFeed in the way, I guess, older comics go through Saturday Night Live or what, you know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah, for sure.
So I was like, oh, like Dammy Lee, she's really cool. Like, oh, it turns out that she crossed paths with this guy at BuzzFeed, and there's another guy, I can't remember his name off the tip of my tongue right now, that I also like. Totally different style, but he also has references occasionally to BuzzFeed, and I think he went through there as well. But was BuzzFeed, they were creating content. They were not an aggregator. Or were they an aggregator, or they did everything?
Well, I guess like that's the controversy, I think, because it's like they theoretically are creating it, but then that like some people point out that if someone posts a really interesting point on Reddit, like you can count the minutes before a repackaged version, right, will like kind of maybe snipe that observation someone had. But like I don't want to get too into that. I just, if you don't have a strong opinion,
I
you
know,
can kind of focus more on the guy, because another element too, like you're saying that we used to be on BuzzFeed, now he's independent. It's kind of where we've crossed the threshold where it used to be you print for a newspaper, then after 20 years you get a digest printed in a book. Now these guys, like that's going faster. Like you don't need to be 20 years in the industry to make your own book.
Yeah,
like those are coming out.
How many followers? I don't know. I just like, he has 292,000 followers. I guess that's a lot. I have no idea. Like, what threshold do the publishers start to salivate, or whatever publishers do, right, when they consider people worthy of their attention and their investment. Yep.
And then also, I guess, like certain content is like a book isn't what it used to be. So like that, his kind of stuff is very easily digestible. Like I guess the whole like you could just look at a couple, put it down, pick it up again.
Right.
It's like a really easy to
publish, right? I wonder what that genre is called. I'm sure they have a name for it.
So like I don't know if this is a digression, but you mentioned that like you kind of daydreamed at some points about that would be cool to have a webcomic. That was one of the first things that got me online before I even thought of myself as like going to art school or anything. Is that like me and my buddy from high school, we would like go to the local 24-hour place, and we would like, I would make comics and he would like write stories, and then we would have to code it ourselves. And
wow,
that was mostly him. But like we're talking back when, before like Facebook or anything, you would have to make it where if you had a picture, you'd have to upload the picture, you'd have to resize it yourself, you'd have to upload a separate image that was smaller
For the
and
thumbnail.
yeah, for the thumbnail. And some people, had some positions where, like, for their office or something, they were in charge of that, so they got a taste of it too. But if you weren't there for that moment, that like 5 years,
Yeah.
where there was an internet but there wasn't like
Well,
tools.
I was definitely there. I had a slightly different, came in from a slightly different avenue, but way back then, 2004 time frame, I think, or three. No, yeah, somewhere early thousands. I had like a blog on Blogger, and a couple of friends. Yeah, it was right after college. And there was a friend who, I ended up traveling all over the place for work. And then a friend of mine went up to Seattle, and him and I stayed in touch, and we sort of noodled via email and my blog a little bit that we would start a web, or not even we didn't think of a web comic. We just started a comic strip, like this whole concept of web comic. And then he sent me Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud, and that book was awesome. I love that book. I still have it. But that also kind of derailed me a little bit because it got me thinking more seriously about just the art of graphic communication in general. And we were far apart. It never really materialized. But yeah, that was kind of my little nerdy diversion into, let's start a comic strip. Oh wait, let's study art of what's that book called? Understanding Comics for a little bit. And then it never happened. Got interested about something else, and the blog ended up dying.
That was definitely the Bible, though.
Was
that
it?
Book. Yeah, because or at least it was to me too.
I had no idea. Yeah, I was blown away when he sent it to me. Just no idea that like that existed, or that level of like thinking had gone into.
Because when I eventually did go to get my BFA, that was like the comic book class where it had like Scott McCloud, and it had like Spiegelman's Mouse. I don't know if you're familiar, but like there were like two or three kind of books that, like, if you were interested in what was then becoming, they now call sequential art. Like that was like it. That was like the book.
Cool.
And
I had no idea. Like, this is cool.
You had the right one. And like previous to that, like obviously like comic strips and comic art, or even illustration in general, isn't really considered worth like artists' attention. Okay. And like just like fans of it, there was a book that came out in like the 80s called The Marvel Way to Draw Comics. Okay. But like there were like precious few books that like we're gonna talk about it in a scholarly way.
Interesting. That's interesting.
But you mentioned you had a few other guys like Nathan W. Pyle. Do you want to like shout them out, or?
No, I think we cover them in future episodes. Like Dammy Lee's one that comes to my mind. And Adam Tots. And they're so totally different styles and personalities, but that's the other thing. I feel like Instagram's giving me that feeling of like the back of the newspaper where you have this variety, right? Of your kind of there's 10 or 20 different comics, and 2 or 3 of them are your favorites, right? And you look forward to seeing them again. And I think it's those 3. I think they're all in New York City, or were at some point, and they cracked me up.
Yeah. Well, was there any other things about Nathan W. Pyle that kind of like you was important to you, but we kind of haven't touched on yet?
No, that's it. Just again, one of the guys whose work inspires me in general, and then the fact that when we were planning this particular recording this session, this calendar negotiating, and that you also mentioned that you're trying to avoid that, right? That's super painful, that calendar negotiation piece. And I'm like, Nathan's got a comic specifically on this, what we're dealing with right now.
Right.
Awesome.
Yeah, I follow him. I would suggest people do the same. I'll put a link to him in the show notes, so you can kind of find him. And if you want, you could even send me the specific link to that.
Schedule. Actually, also, if you can give me access, I can add show notes myself directly, and we can a short circuit. That's
for sure.
Some cycle time there.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, so should we transition to the next thing, or
Absolutely.
what do you think? Okay, cool. Well, so the other thing we were going to talk about today was, so Tanji talked about his one of his inspirations. I'm going to talk about a project that I've been working on, which is pizza box paintings. So, from your limited experience with that, did you have like a comment you wanted to share before I kind of ruin your concept of it with my
Uh,
opinion?
no, I think it's pretty cool. I like that idea. I do remember late last year in the fall going to the first time I'd ever submit anything to the little art gallery at the art station, Big Shanty, and you were walking up with a pizza box, and I thought it was like a snack. It was actually you taking some of your work in, so that was pretty cool.
Yeah, and that's kind of hits at some of like what's important about it to me, I guess,
Uh,
which I'll probably get into. But at first, like, I think the natural question is like, oh, like what's important about pizza boxes to you? And I think the answer for me would be nothing. Like, it's not that they're important; it's kind of just that it's natural.
hmm,
So, like for instance, I'll use this like kind of pretentious example, but I had a friend who was a fashion professor. He's an expert in fabric design and fiber arts in general, named Glenn Kaufman, and he asked me to film some of his work.
hmm,
And what he had done was he'd made these dresses called kaunakes, which were based on like Sumerian dresses.
hmm.
And the idea was that back then you would use whatever materials were around, so you would often decorate like this simple dress with like bird feathers.
Okay.
And so his idea was that he doesn't art in a modern concept or like life. We don't have the same materials around, but he would use the equivalent. So he would use like the plastic folders or plastic bags that would cover up like newspapers,
Okay.
and they would be bright red, like to get your attention, right? So there were these like this trash essentially that was on the ground, but it was pretty. So he was like kind of making the connection that I'm using the abundant natural material, but I'm living in an inorganic world. So he made these dresses out of these recycled red bags, and I kind of think that there's something parallel about that for me. That it's like, um,
No, that's cool.
what do I paint on? I
Yeah.
paint on a canvas I buy, or the objects that are abundantly around me, which is cardboard boxes. And
Dude,
so, yeah,
so you gotta come paint some stuff at the makerspace.
yeah, for sure.
For sure. So that's cool. I get
And
that.
yeah, and like it's kind of funny how it's like in terms of it not being a precious thing, which was that I would start off using used pizza boxes, and then I did so many I was outstripping the pizza boxes I'd eaten, and I had to buy like a ton of them, like in bulk.
Wait, you bought a bulk pack of pizza boxes, like some
Yes, yeah.
generic label on the.
Oh no, just like white plain boxes.
Oh,
Like
they're
I
not
guess,
even
and
they're not stamped with anything, huh?
right. They're
That's
so like in a sense they're not pizza boxes. They're just boxes, but
wow.
yeah. And then another aspect of it was that what first got it started was that the boxes that a local pizza place had, there were these gigantic white, like bleached white boxes, so that they were already a really useful surface, right? That they would
Hmm.
pick up an image easily.
Sure.
And then over time, it evolved where they went back to like I guess what was cheaper, the generic like unbleached brown,
Uh-huh.
and so I had to prime them myself to
Jeez.
get that surface back. Um, but it was kind of like funny or interesting, like that evolution, like that it
That's
happened
awesome.
naturally.
That's
Um, and so another kind of like aspect of it too is that this kind of maybe go back into your experience where like there's a history in America, and I guess everyone has their equivalent of like certain sizes and shapes, and this is kind of like a really simplified version of it, but basically you could say, you know, like where are these shapes and like sizes and shapes come from, and the experience that I've had, at least from my limited experience, was that train shipping and now like truck shipping is like where some of them come from, which I found kind of interesting. Like why is 18 by 24? Like why is that common, right?
Oh, yeah.
And or any size shape. And one of the more compelling answers that seemed logical was that it's because that you can only have so much space for shipping,
Uh-huh.
and so like you would have to make the sizes regular so that they would be consistent, and it's less expensive if you don't have to worry about the different like it being a variety of different weird shapes or sizes, right?
Okay.
So like the idea that I'm getting to go out of that a little bit is also a little bit of a fun aspect for
Oh.
me.
Because your pizza box being one by one square,
Right, exactly.
which is also
And
like super consistent with Instagram because they were kind of
right,
the first ones to push for that, right?
and it's actually almost I don't want to like say revolutionary, but it in the history of like image making, there's this love affair with the golden ratio, and that like that you history of photography has been like the rule of thirds and stuff. So
Yeah.
this has been a kind of really interesting transition,
Nice. Yeah. So
and
weren't Polaroids also instant Polaroids one by one, or were they slightly rectangular?
no, you're right. It's not like that there hasn't been any, but like
No, no. But I'm
like
also thinking like that's why I think Polaroid was probably also founded for whatever its life cycle was, right? A couple
mhm,
decades. Like it found its niche, right? Because it
mhm.
was a little different and out of the ordinary, and the fact that it was instant, it just sort of was all part of the appeal.
hmm And then also, just because we're on the subject, I remember in like my survey courses, there was the discussion of a square like a circle. This composition is hard to pull off. Like there was a discussion like in the
Oh,
Renaissance of like it's actually harder to design something for a square than it is for a rectangle, because with a rectangle there's an inherent like directionality, like
okay.
you can like
Yep.
that you can depending on where you put
Yep.
objects or people in it, like there's an inherent drama. But with a square it's so static that it's harder to pull off. And so I thought that was fun. Like I tucked it away as like, oh, I can rise to that challenge, like I can
Little
pull off a
bag,
square.
little bag of tricks.
Yeah. And then also just like tying it in again to making in general, I think of it in terms of like material. And so like I really enjoy a flat, like hard surface to paint on. And I usually use this example for my students, but did you know that like the Mona Lisa was painted on a wood panel, not on a canvas?
Nope, I did not know
Yeah.
that.
So like the history of painting starts with the wall, because the first thing people painted was
Right,
the wall,
right.
and then from that like wood panels, and then once there was a revolution in like paint technology, and the portability of a canvas became like a new trend. But so I actually am still in love with that panel aspect, and so
Oh,
I really like the flat without any ridges, and that it's like a really smooth surface.
but is canvas? I don't. Isn't canvas kind of hard? Like it's taut, and isn't it kind of
Well,
like nails? Or is it kind of soft when you're actually painting on it?
okay, two things. One is you could put enough primer on it and then sand it so it becomes as
Oh, gee.
similar,
Yeah.
and you can also like, but no matter what, there'll be like a little bit of give, like it
So
like to the tautness.
okay.
So part of it you could say is it's not like traditional. It's more like that I'm lazy, right? That like I don't want to do the work to a canvas to make it the surface that I want. I want to just have the surface ready
Yeah. Nothing wrong with that.
for, for the impulsive act.
Sure.
And then if you go through it, it's like okay, canvas you physically have to stretch it, which is like an ordeal. And then metal isn't good because the like it won't ever sink into metal. It'll always
Oh,
like if you
right.
paint on metal in 1,000 years, if someone goes by and scrapes it with their fingernail, they could like pull it off.
Okay.
Whereas like when you paint on wood or canvas or in my case paper,
So
it bonds and becomes
right.
the object. So it's sort of like that's what I mean by it just being natural. That it's like this is what gets the job done in my life.
That's cool.
And then also, like you brought up Instagram, right? So that's kind of another kind of fun aspect to this where, so depending on how much you like art or like my art, it's very easy to say like, okay, you painted on a pizza box, like who cares, right?
Hmm.
But if you, the selective cropping of like you, if I take a picture of an image and I put it on Instagram, it doesn't have that association of being on a pizza box, right? It's just the image. So I've had situations where there's like kind of like this crazy surprise that it's like, oh, that's on a pizza box. That's crazy. Like there's
Yeah.
this like this twist
Correct.
to my work,
Absolutely. Yeah, I
and
think
I
that's
also
really cool. I think there's like a really good, uh, like there's a good, I don't know, there's something that goes well between pizza and art. I actually can think of a couple pizza places that I like that have like an arty vibe to them as well about it, which I think is pretty cool. So I think it lends itself well. I mean, heck, even Mellow Mushrooms kind of got that art vibe. I mean, I don't really like the Mellow Mushroom vibe personally, but they have like that theme. And I think actually I just took my boy there this past weekend, and in the back of their menu they actually have a little write up of like the main artists that they collaborated with to come up with that Mellow Mushroom look that they've got going on, which I thought was pretty cool, and that they had that kind of shout out to that. Um, but yeah, I think the pizza box is cool and got potential. I mean, maybe you could open a pizza joint someday as a way to like have
go full
like a
circle.
gallery. Yeah, go. So actually, I'm trying to remember. I don't have the details, so I'm afraid I'm going to ramble on a little bit. But I read an article or heard a story a few years ago about some artist I think he's down in Florida, who's got a pizza place, and um, he was always kind of uh, you know, like his family didn't approve of him doing art or whatever, struggled as an artist, and then somehow he got a little bit of money or something happened, and he opened a pizza restaurant and kind of committed himself to doing that for a couple years and got the sort of the thing where it became self-sustainable, right? It was successful enough. And then he kind of turned it into his own personal art gallery. And I gotta go dig for this. It's just a really cool story that he even said at some point, he's like, yeah, the pizza place ended up becoming a way to he like became his own patron essentially, right? Like back in the day, he
Right.
had the church or some king or whatever
Hmm.
pays for the artist to do awesome work. And he sort of became very self-sufficient where like his restaurant did that. And then his restaurant became a place to be the gallery, and his customers came because they loved it. And then he was a successful businessman at this point. So he didn't actually have to work a lot at the pizza place, right? He just kind of got to hang out and put new work up. And he had his studio kind of in the back or the side property of the pizza place or whatever. That was one that always kind of stuck with me too, where it's like, oh, that sounds really cool. I'm sure easier said than done, or it's got a lot of warts associated with it,
Hmm.
but that sounded
Oh,
like,
yeah. And one last kind of practical
uh-huh.
element, which kind of will act as a nice kind of like conclusion, is that um, when you have a piece of artwork, anyone, especially people who aren't necessarily thinking of themselves as collectors, there's the physical issue of like, what do I do with it?
Right.
How do I hang it? How do I transport it?
Yep.
So part of it is that it addresses that very simply. So people, if you ask them like, could you hang this painting, they're going to be stressed out about like, oh, I have to put a hole in my wall, or how high do I do it, and like getting the physical like cord to kind of catch on the thing is stressful. So with my pizza box paintings, the box is the surface. So it's literally something you could hang up with a single push pin
Uh-huh.
and put it in the back, and it's done. And most people have like drywall somewhere in their house in their rec room or something. So like that, it's like that part of it for me is that it eliminates that anxiety.
Cool.
Because there's like a kind of big hurdle for a lot of people thinking of like, oh, I wouldn't even know where to start with art. And so for me, that's another aspect of it, just like making it so just plug and play.
Nice. That's cool.
But
So have you like sold some pieces or
yeah, for sure.
your own?
And
That's awesome.
yeah, and like now I've done so many that like it's something I go to. It's something I go back
So
to.
did you like gain some weight there for a while where you're just like just eating pizza constantly to get the boxes to feed the work, and then you started outstrip that and you're like this is not sustainable.
Well, no, it's actually the opposite, where it's like I kind of notice them piling up, and then I'm like, oh well, I need to get them done, like because if you don't, they're they
Greasy.
can take up space, yeah. So
Yeah,
like,
greasy
oh,
grease.
oh yeah, yeah. No, well, you brought up a good point with being greasy. Is that as an object, just like once again going into like maker mode, a pizza box is something that has a single use purpose. It has to be strong enough to get the job done, but then it only has the lifespan of going from the restaurant to the home, right?
Right.
So that if you get it home and you take it out of the box, that box is still pretty good,
Yeah,
depending on how greasy the pizza is and
sure.
how sloppy you are. So like they're like pretty good naturally. And then when I prime them, it's like if anything that's dirty, if you put 3 coats of paint on it, it looks pretty good afterwards.
That's so cool.
But okay, so one more little thing I wanted to kind of try out with you, and I'm purposely kind of ambushing you with it, was to say that before we sign off, I was wondering, is there anything that you like fixed today or in like the last week that you might want to? Is that a story that you have?
I'll tell you what I
Yeah.
didn't fix is I actually broke is my car. The check engine light's been coming on recently, and found out it was my catalytic converter is the code that's related to the check engine light. So I started researching like replacing that, and then luckily buried like just little hidden gems of comments in the forums. You'll find one lone like smart person going, uh, catalytic converters don't go bad. Something's causing that to go bad with your combustion system. That's essentially poisoning your catalytic converter. And the rest of the comments are people ignoring that and talking about all the work you got to do to replace the damn thing. But that got me thinking, and then so it's like, okay, what can be leaking? And I think on my car in particular, it's like the valve cover on the engine it allows a little bit of oil to leak by. And now I'm burning a little bit of oil, like just enough to put the sensor out of whack. So I read that it was pretty easy to just go tighten your bolts. And I did that. I've done it a couple times and it's worked for like a month or two, or what I'm noticing now is when the temperature changes. Uh, I think that the engine block temperature cycles a little bit and the bolts start to wiggle loose. So, and the temperature just changed recently. So I don't know why I got this wire to check the bolts that also hold down my spark plug wire things, but I over tightened one of those and broke it just 2 days ago. Uh, so now that's what I'm sort of kicking myself that I got to figure out how to fix, and I don't want to replace it's like, I mean, it doesn't even look like plastic, but it turned out it was plastic. Then I'm thinking like, can I like JB weld and like essentially glue it back together or what? That I'm going to see if I can figure out, because the car, I don't think it's worth replacing that component. And the spark plug wire doesn't really come loose. I guess it kind of just rattles around a little bit, but it's kind of been in, at least it's stayed in for the last couple of days without too much, but it's a broken bolt that I got to fix or not a bolt, but the nut that's threaded on the cover.
Yeah, I'm realizing now it could be like a runner too, like that. Like 3 weeks from now, we'll be hearing about like the crazy thing that you're jerry rigging together.
Exactly. To avoid doing the proper repair.
Right. All right. Well, on that note, thanks for
Awesome.
the chat tonight. And do you have any final thoughts? Or
Now I'm looking forward to the next one. Thanks.
okay, bye.
Talk to you later. Bye.
Find more information at doubleprimer.com.